On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, President Biden visits the port of Los Angeles and tells the top 9 container carriers, if you're in front of me, I'd pop them. I mean it. I'm your host, Sal Mercaglano. Welcome to this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. If you're new to the channel, take a moment, click and subscribe to the channel so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. So President Biden had a lively weekend visiting the battleship Iowa. And in the backdrop, the glamorous port of Los Angeles for everybody to see. And he proceeded to give a speech in which he talked about the issues of the supply chain, of the container carriers, a whole myriad of topics, as a matter of fact. And what I thought I'd do is break them down, talk about what he said, how accurate they were based on the facts and the data that's out there, and also give my perspective based on having watched the supply chain now for over 2 years and how it's been developing. So let's go ahead and jump into the video. So the president decided to address obviously issues with the supply chain. We have the Ocean Shipping Reform Act coming up for a vote before Congress. And this was obviously an opportunity to talk about it. He'll also talk about issues of inflation, the appointment of a new port czar, a new advisor to oversee the supply chain task force. And what I want to do is just talk a little bit here about what President Biden had to say, the good and the bad.
Thank you, Sal. I understand Americans are anxious, and they're anxious for good reason. I was raised in a household when the price of gasoline rose precipitously. It was the discussion at the table. It made a difference when food prices went up. But we've never seen anything like Putin's tax on both food and gas.
So he's talking about the fact that inflation is being driven by a couple of factors. In particular here, he's talking about Putin's food and gas taxes, or issues that are raising those costs. Let's just address the gas issue. This is this week's In Petroleum from the Energy Information Administration. Those of you who watch the channel know this is one of my favorites. And here you see a graph that shows you the cost of retail gasoline. And up until January of 2021, pretty steady at just over $2 a gallon. Oh, $2 a gallon. Man, those are the days for gasoline. But since January of 2021, we've seen a steady increase kicking up all the way up until March of 2022, when all of a sudden you have a $1 jump. Now, prior to that, gas was about $1 higher than it had been the year before. But then you add an extra dollar jump on it. That extra dollar is the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. But then what you see is, after a quick little stabilization of that, you're seeing that graph go up higher than before. In other words, you're accumulating inflation along with the Putin's invasion of Ukraine adding to the gas situation. So obviously inflation, a big issue that we're seeing. He then talked about the port congestion issue.
Last fall, ports around the world were congested due to disruptions caused by the pandemic.
True.
So we brought together port operators, shipping companies, and labor, and to ease the bottlenecks. And as a result, over the holidays last, 97% of all the packages were delivered on time and on shelves when you went Christmas shopping. Remember?
All right, I'm going to hold off on that. That is, I think they're looking at a CPI index or a retailer index for that. I think there were a lot more shortages than 3% last year in Christmas. I could just give firsthand knowledge of going in stores around my community and seeing that and talking to manufacturers and everybody else who was short on gear. I talked about way back in May of 2021, do your Christmas shopping early, because we knew this was going to be an issue. But, stats are stats. You can find the stat that fits your narrative.
Remember, we weren't going to have anything on those shows. You all did it. No, not a joke. You did it.
A little self-grandizing, always a good thing.
On time with minimal delays. Delivery times are actually quicker than they were before the pandemic.
Okay, I got to say, I think that one is wrong. I just posted something on Twitter from Sea Intelligence that talks about container company reliability. So this is the report put out in April of 2022 by Sea Intelligence on global schedule reliability and the global average of delays for late vessel arrivals. Purple is 2022. So if you look at, first off, reliability, pre-COVID, he's talking again about pre-COVID, 2018, the green line, 2019, the orange line, 2020 is the green, 2020 is the green line. Blue is the 2018 line. Right there, 2020, you see reliability just fall off a cliff. And last year it stood at below 40%. And even this year was started off at 30% reliability and has just upticked just a bit. But when you look at average delays for late vessel arrivals in green, you're talking over 5 days by the end of 2020, capping off at 8 days by the end of 2021 into that. I mean, again, I think we're talking about more delays here than what the president is actually discussing.
Thank you, Sal.
I'm just giving you the data, sir. I'm sorry. It's the way it comes up.
And today there are about 40% fewer containers clogging the docks for long periods of time than there were last November.
Okay. This one I'm going to call BS on, because that is a stat from the Port of LA. I assume he's talking about LA. He's in LA. So let's go ahead and look at the stats for the Port of LA. This is their container dwell time. Let me get my mug off here. This is their import containers by dwell time. If you remember way back in October, they announced this idea of, hey, we're going to do this idea of hyperdemerge. We're going to, basically force container companies to pay $100 every day, increasing by $100, that containers are on the terminal. Well, they never have implemented this. It's always hung over their head. And what they did is they were able to get it down from over 90,000 containers down to a low of under 50,000 containers by January. But what you've seen since January is this thing has been upticking and upticking. And now they're just 20% down. President just said 40-something% down. But this chart shows you they're 20% down. And probably the most disturbing factor you see right here is the 9+ days are on the uptick. You see those increasing. So what we're seeing across the board is an increase in congestion across everything. And understand, the congestion isn't just in the Port of LA. It's in Charleston. It's on the East Coast. It's on the Gulf Coast. It's in Europe. We see it everywhere. The problem you have is containers are flowing into ports, but now because of inflation, the potential of a recession going on, people are ordering less. So that means there's less goods coming out of warehouses, distribution centers, and the goods are piling up between the ports and the distribution centers, which creates congestion, which means nothing moves, but goods are still flowing in across, even though we've seen numerous reports. Craig Fuller over at Freightways and many others have talked about this idea that, that demand has fallen off a cliff. That's been pushed back by the people at the Journal of Commerce and over at Lloyd's and Tradewinds and a few other groups. They're fighting it out. But what we do see is in the data, and what the data is showing is that we're still seeing cargo moving across like we normally do. And matter of fact, the Port of LA reports a record year this month for May. That means there's goods flowing in, but they're not going anywhere. And that's going to cause the same congestion we saw happen in these ports that happened last year at this time.
Thank you, Sal.
No, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir. President continues his speech, and he talks about the appointment of General Steve Lyons, who was the former commander of the United States Transportation Command, to be the new port supply envoy, replacing John Bakari.
We're going to keep at it with the new super chain envoy, General Steve Lyons. General Lyons is a 4-star general. He handled the transportation of a little bit of thing. He had transportation command, only tens of millions of billions of tons of things to move from little.
Okay, I don't think he moved billions of tons of cargo, but he moved a lot. And my issue with General Lyons' appointment is I think General Lyons is a fantastic person. I've told him this. I think as commander of United States Transportation Command, he did a stellar performance. However, this is a different performance he's going to have to do in operating with commercial firms. And even though you do operate with commercial firms with United States Transportation Command, you're dealing with companies that do not deal with the military and not used to military style leadership. And you can't just go in and bark orders. This is a different kind of environment, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Okay, this is the heart of the piece here, where he gets into it with regards to the 9 container companies. And go ahead and let this run, and we'll talk about it on the flip side.
I have to admit to you, a lot of us elected officials have been in office for a while. Every once in a while, something you learn makes you viscerally angry. Like if you had the person in front of you, you'd want to pop them. No, I really mean it. There are nine major ocean line shipping companies.
Can I just give a quick shout out for the photo bomb by the Crowley tractor tug right there in the background? Perfect timing. Every news clip has got this going in the background. I don't know if they did this on purpose or not, but kudos to Crowley for the absolute perfect timing of a photo bomb by a tug ever in history.
That ship from Asia to the United States. 9. They formed 3 consortium.
He says consortiums, but their alliance is the term they use. Nitpicking.
These companies have raised their prices by as much as 1,000%. So everything coming from Asia, they get 90-some% of it, the stuff coming from Asia. They've raised it by 1,000%. That's why I called on Congress to crack down on their foreign-owned shipping companies that raise their prices while raking in just last year $190 billion in profit, a 7-fold increase in 1 year.
Okay, so a lot to unpack in that statement right there. So let's look at a couple of things that you need to know going into this. So when he talks about 9 companies, he's talking about the 9 companies in the 3 alliances. And you see them right here in this kind of developmental chart that shows you how the alliances came together. The initial element of the alliances way back in the late 1990s was by smaller firms coming together to kind of pair up against larger firms. And what you saw were these tiny lines that came in. You formed the Grand Alliance, the Global Alliance, and then a lot of the other carriers were either, paired up. Maersk and Sealand were together, but other companies were separate. But what's happened over time, to the time you get to the end of 2020, you see the development of what becomes the 3 big alliances. The 2M alliance between Maersk and Mediterranean Shipping Company, that's the biggest, represents almost 35% of all container capacity. The Ocean Alliance, CMA CGM, which is a French company, COSCO and OOCL. COSCO is the China state line. OOCL had been created under Hong Kong, but now Hong Kong is part of China. It's all part of a Chinese state line. And Evergreen, which is a strange conglomerate here because Evergreen is Taiwan. And then you have the Alliance, which is made up of ONE. ONE is made up of a series of Japanese companies, MOL, K-Line, and NYK Line. Yangmin, which is a Taiwanese line, HMM, which is Korean, and Hapag-Lloyd, which is German. And those 9 firms represent about 85% of the carrying capacity of containers out there. Now, I should note a couple of things that the president doesn't mention. Maersk Lines, CMA CGM, and Hapag have American subsidiaries. There are 60 ships that are U.S. flagged that operate under the U.S. flag for something called the Maritime Security Program. The container ships in those firms are operated through subsidiaries of Maersk, CMA CGM through their subsidiary called APL, and then Hapag. So these companies, which are foreign based, don't get me wrong, Maersk is based in Denmark, Hapag is in Germany, CGM is in France. However, they do have American subsidiaries in the United States. And one of the other things he misses out on is all the other container liners that are involved. So, for example, if you look at just the Asia to United States run, there are 10 shipping lines that operate from Asia to the East Coast. Not included in here is Zim. If you look at Asia to the West Coast, there are 13 other lines that are involved in this, including Matson Line, which is a wholly owned U.S. shipping firm. However, just look at the Asia to the West Coast. The 9 big alliances do control an overwhelming percentage of that, almost 85%. The other 13 lines control just under 15%. So they do have massive power. There's no denying that. Let's hop over to the Global Maritime Hub, which just posted this recently. Operating margins exceed 50% for several carriers in Q2. So one of the things they'd use is information from Alphaliner that puts together the margins by the container companies. And you'll see right here, this is the average of all the 9 major container liners plus Zim. So top 10 are in here. And one of the things I want you to notice real quick before we jump into the record profits they're into, Go back to 2009, right after the collapse of the economy in 2008. Notice how there are negatives, negative 19.2 for second quarter of '09, and then a boom back in 2010, and then down in 2011, then mixed results in 2012, and down in 13, and just a tick up in 14, and split in 15, down in 16, up a little bit in 17, back down in 18, barely profitable in 19, and then 20 and 21 into 22 profits. Understand the norm for these container lines was marginal profitability. They were not making money. There's a whole reason behind that I can go into, but again, it's a longer version of that video than this. But suffice it to say that they have made more profits in the past year than they have in the past decade of the 2010s. Just look at that. You can see why. And so, yeah, they're making record making profit. And again, we shouldn't be upset about profit. The question is, are they manipulating the rates? And that is what the president kind of alleges in the speech, that they've raised the rates 1,000%. Well, again, that had a lot to do with spot rates, not really the long-term rates. Understand in global shipping, a lot of companies made fixed rates for a long period of time, and they were shipping goods at a pretty good rate for a long time. The whole reason the world has benefited from global shipping the way we have is because shipping rates were so low for the past decade because of this. Again, this is the container lines doing it. They were competing against themselves. They overbuilt. They'd done a lot of things to get themselves into that situation. But now they're at record profits. And one of the things that we're seeing right now is we're targeting these container firms for, just like you heard the president blame Putin for the gas prices when gas prices have already been going up. You see this right here. There's a great talk here by John Conrad back in last year, July of 2021, wrote this piece. It's about stimulus checks, not ocean carriers, like Maersk says, White House source. When they're talking about the inflation, what's causing the inflation? Is it the higher shipping costs? Or is it the stimulus being pumped into the economy? The fact that we haven't seen any interest rates go up. There's a lot of issues at play here. It's not just the ocean carriers being ocean carriers. Now, don't get me wrong. We need to be careful going forward because the non-ocean carriers will find themselves in a commanding position that could lead to some potential problems. So I think one of the reasons for the president having this speech and saying this is because of this.
The Senate passed legislation. I'm hopeful the House is going to act soon to crack down on these companies, as I've asked, and lower the cost. And I'm grateful to two Californians, Speaker Pelosi and John Garamendi.
But anyway, what we're talking about here is the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, the new bill that's going before Congress. The House and Senate have passed two versions of this bill. And again, there's a lot about this. FreightWaves has got a great article here about this that I'll link over here. Congress is voting soon to overhaul the shipping industry. Here's everything you need to know by John Gallagher. He kind of breaks it down and talks about it. And what this bill is going to do is deal with a couple of issues. It's going to deal with demurrage and detention rulemaking, basically the ability to file against the ocean carriers if you get fined for late fees on the containers. Unfair and discriminatory methods rulemaking on refusing to deal, ship exchange registry, street dwell time statistics, enhancing the Federal Maritime Commission's investigative capacity, emergency authority to address supply chain capacities, chassis pool practices, CDL licensing. He talked a lot about CDL licensing early in the speech. Review of potential discrimination on hazmat transport, using inland ports to store and transfer containers, reports on adaptation of technology at U.S. ports, and then other issues, including public disclosure, investigations, data collection, public submission, and consumer affairs office. All in all, let me be clear about something. The new Ocean Shipping Reform Act, which the World Shipping Council is screaming about. I went to their webpage, went to their social media. They haven't said anything since Biden's speech. They're quiet. They haven't said a word. Behind the scenes, however, they're lobbying heavily to get the Ocean Shipping Reform Act killed. Understand, we haven't had substantial reform for 20-something years. In 1984, then Senator Biden was in the Senate when the Shipping Act of 1984 came in that began the initial deregulation of the shipping industry. And he voted against it. And a lot of senators did because they didn't want to see deregulation. However, by 1998, a lot of the benefits had been seen in deregulation, lower freight costs. We were seeing really a benefit. It's post-Cold War. It's before the rise of Putin and China. And so everybody, when the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 1998 came around, then Senator Biden voted for it. And so did a lot of people. Obviously, it passed Congress without a problem. However, one of the death knells of those two acts was the demise of two big U.S. container firms, U.S. Lines in 1986, and then Sealand, which was procured by Maersk Lines, and really took the United States out of the business. And it's one of the reasons why there are 9 big foreign ocean carriers today, not in the United States. It's because of that. Now we're seeing the Ocean Shipping Reform Act coming before Congress. And the question really becomes is, will this do anything to regulate those big carriers? Will it set freight rates, for example? No. Used to be you had to approve your rates. You had to send your rates to the FMC for approval. Now the FMC reviews your rates, which means that if there's an issue in the future, they can sue you, take you to arbitration, and try to get the rates down. But there's no approval process. The other issue that you have here is the fact that there's a memorandum of understanding that had been renewed between the FMC, Federal Maritime Commission, and the Department of Justice. Now, the FMC is separate of the administration. The DOJ is not. It's under the Attorney General, Merrick Garland. And the president can order the Attorney General to issue and start enacting antitrust legislation against the 9 companies in 3 alliances. It was tried back in 2017. It was pulled back in 2019 as no, there was no reason given for why the antitrust legislation was stopped. Both the United States, or all 3, the US, the EU, and the China has given a go-ahead for these cartels to exist. However, if the US decides not to go with it, that could be the beginning of an attack directly against the 9 big shipping companies. So let me be clear. I think the 9 big shipping companies have a lot to talk about. I think they should be. I think you should be vocal. Why are you not vocal? The World Shipping Council, you're not doing your job. You have not talked about the fact that you have provided the world with goods and shipments during the height of the pandemic, and you never stopped sailing. Those mariners were fantastic. They never stopped doing anything. However, they are busy lobbying behind the scenes because they don't think they should be out publicly talking about it. And that's a bit of an issue. There's a lot needs to be done. I am a pro advocate. Listen, I'm America first. I am a big guy who thinks we should have American shipping lines involved in this. And I think we should be enacting legislation to enhance that. The problem is competing against state lines like Costco, companies that have a lot of backing by their national governments is really tough in this day and age without a lot of emphasis and incentives by the US government. All right, let's wrap up President Biden's speech.
I am so sick and tired of trickle-down economics. It does not work. When the middle class is doing well, and they do well because of labor, when the middle class is doing well, the poor have a way up, and the wealthy do very, very well. They have never been hurt when the middle class is doing well. Never, never. So it's about time we start to regather and remember who we are and get a lot of this done. But there's no better place to start it than right here on the port and letting those 9 foreign shippers understand the ripoff is over. Thank you. Thanks.
All right, I think the ripoff is a little disingenuous.
Thank you, Sal. And
well, you're welcome, sir, again. But I think, again, what we need to be thinking about here is a couple of things. Listen, one of the things I'm shocked at about this speech is that never a word came out of him about is the impending ILWU and Pacific Maritime Association contract renegotiation that expires at the end of this month. We already know it's going to be extended. We know that. They've already said that. They cannot come to an agreement right now. But one of the big issues that is going on is automation. If you watch this video, you watch in the background what goes on in the background. And what you're looking at is a port that's not automated. You're looking at a port where there are people driving trucks, there's people moving things. It's not moving very fast. That's a problem. The ports are not automated. We haven't put new cranes into this port in I don't know how long, except for a couple of areas. You got to go over to the Long Beach terminal, the LBCT terminal, to see a automated efficient port. We need automation. And by automation, I'm not talking about getting rid of workers in longshoremen. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is data. I'm talking about is movement. Is too many shippers tell me all the time, listen, I could track my cargo from a warehouse in China to the docks in Shanghai, across to the ship until it gets into the port of LA and Long Beach, then it hits a black hole. Then I don't know when it's ever coming out. And it just gets lost. And that is not the way to do business today. We need that data. That's one of the big things that's in the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, is to increase data collection. Any speech by a president is political. There's no doubt that this was a politically oriented speech. However, attacking the 9 ocean carriers is a useful term for him. I mean, it's a big, big target. Let me go against Maersk and Mediterranean Shipping and Costco and CMA, CGM and Hop Hog and Yang Min and HMM and all these other companies. ONE, it's fine. Go against the big companies. I understand that's what a lot of people like. They're making huge profits right now. But look at where they're spending their profits. They're reinvesting in transportation. They're reinvesting in ports, in infrastructure. They're buying new efficient vessels to come out, fuel efficient vessels, which is going to be a big thing because we're going to change the efficiency of vessels. There are a lot of things that they should be doing. However, there are things that they're not doing. They're not taking American exports. They are benefiting from the United States without paying their due share in things like port infrastructure and maintaining our ports. They keep building bigger ships, and we have to build to accommodate them. That's a big issue. They need to be paying their share. Again, if I was president for a day, if I could do what I wanted to do when it came to the maritime, I would reshuffle the deck of federal maritime agencies. Back in the time, MARAD and the Federal Maritime Commission was one thing. I think it needs to be one thing. It needs to be level and equal with aviation, road, and rail. It needs to have the power that the FAA has, needs to be on the maritime side. There should be a maritime administration that has that type of power, that does this. Understand, the FMC is completely independent of him, and which, by the way, his FMC, it's really not his, it's the government's FMC, but the FMC, under Fact Finding 29 by Rebecca Dye, found that there was no issue with price fixing during the pandemic. They found that there was competitiveness. Now, they did raise the issue that there is potential for it to go away in the future and that we need to be aware of it. However, they did not find any issue where there was price fixing. So I think in many ways what the president gave was a speech that was very much more politically oriented and not a true snapshot for what's going on in the industry right now, but geared really to help incentivize Congress, particularly the House and Senate, to pass the Ocean Shipping Reform Act.
Thank you, Sal. And
Well, again, sir, I'm happy to help in any way I can. I'm here for you at all times. Hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, give it a thumbs up, share it across social media, and you can head on over to the Patreon page and support the page, or go right to the bottom right down there. There's a super thanks button. If you want to give a one-time donation to the channel to keep us up and running, then we appreciate it. Until our next video, this is Sal signing off, unless I get called by the president to help any day now. He knows me, calls me Sal by first name.